Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell on Friday, May 3rd, 2013, the year beyond Thunderdome. I'm sorry about missing yesterday. Things were a little hectic yesterday for me to get to the news and views as I normally do on Thursday, but that's okay because we've got some interesting news that I want to talk about. Kind of a miscellaneous day as far as the news goes. This week has been an interesting week, however, because on April 30th, that's earlier this week, South Africa and Germany pledged more cooperation. And I've pulled this article. I want to link it for you from the South Africa Info website. This is an interesting article to me because, as you know, South Africa recently officially joined the BRICS nations, and making them what I call now the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and now South Africa. Now, this is an interesting article because German-South African relations have always been interesting, to say the least. During the 60s and 70s, as a matter of fact, during the years of apartheid, the apartheid minority government in South Africa, the West German government and South Africa were accused of cooperating in a secret atomic bomb development program that also included Israel. And the interesting thing, this never really made a story on the radar. But it was a story that was reported and actually published in a book, which I have actually, called The Nuclear Axis. It was a New York Times book, and it was kind of a sleeper. The story never really took off, but it's well worth looking into. But I suspect there's something else really going on with this, and it's more of the German role of playing now a new kind of diplomatic ambiguity. The traditional role of Germany as a Western ally, and now more recently we've seen the German calls for repatriation of their gold, which we're going to get to, because gold is back in the story. But this is another little tiny indicator, not significant in and of itself except in the wider context, that we may be looking at a possible realignment geopolitically, and it's going to center in Europe. It's going to revolve around Russia and Germany, but it's going to bring in other areas of interest to European geopoliticians, and that would certainly include Africa, and especially South Africa, because of South Africa's rich mineral resources, gold, diamonds, and so on. Diamonds more in Namibia, but gold certainly in the Witwatersrand and other areas of South Africa. Now, here's an interesting article that I also want to talk about. This is by the BBC. And again, I want to link this article. This was reported on May 1st, on Wednesday. The Bolivian president, Evo Morales, has officially expelled the organization USAID, and he accused it of conspiring against the Bolivian people and his government. Now, when you link on the actual BBC website, you'll see a picture of President Morales, and on his, I guess, his shirt or his jacket, you can see, if you look closely enough, you can see a picture of Che Guevara, the famous Latin American Cuban revolutionary that was actually killed by American CIA forces. Now, this is interesting because, to me, it's a signal that the world is getting wise. I'm not going to comment on whether, Morales' government is really worth overthrowing or not if you're part of the Western elite, but the thing that I'm interested in is that there's a growing perception that these American organizations are fronts for its intelligence community and covert operations activities, particularly of the kind that we saw in the color revolutions that took place in Eastern Europe, because again you find the National Endowment for Democracy and some of these other organizations that act as fronts for the intelligence agencies behind this activity. And there's also, if you dig long and hard enough into these organizations, you're going to find the name of George Soros popping up repeatedly in connection with them, which raises certain questions about Mr. Soros and who he might really be working for or with. Alright, now, The final story I want to get to, all of these are kind of context and background. They are to me an indicator of the growing disenchantment among the peoples of the world with the policy of the West, and in particular the United States. Now this one, to me, is the most interesting story that I received this week. And it's a story, again, from GATA, and I'll link the article. GATA is the World Gold Association that tracks stories relating to and concerning the world's stock of gold bullion. And this is an interesting article because it says, where is all the gold coming from? And I want to take the time to read this entire article to you. It's very short, but it raises certain issues. And it touches directly on the issue that I was writing about in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations, with the creation of a vast post-war hidden financial superstructure based on recovered Axis bullion. It says, Dear friend of GATA and gold, observing the recent smash in the paper gold market that occurred, incidentally, on the day of the Boston Marathon bombing, our friend asks whether it may signify that Western government gold reserves, particularly U.S. gold reserves, are a lot larger than reported, or if world gold holdings generally are a lot larger than estimated, so much so that gold price suppression can continue for decades or centuries. He cites the famous story about the supposed hoard of looted Asian gold amassed by Japanese Army General Tomoyuki Yamashita during World War II, a hoard some believe to have been spirited away by the U.S. government and used for secret operations around the world. Now let me stop. General Yamashita was not the amasser of this hoard. Rather, if you search the history of Operation Golden Lily, it was Prince Chichibu of the imperial household of Japan that was actually in charge of this operation. And he was in charge of the operation for all of Asia. As the war began to turn against the Japanese, the Philippine Islands, which had been used as the transshipment point for all of this gold from Asia to Japan, the Japanese government decided to simply bury the gold hoard there in the Philippines. So in other words, a lot of this gold made it to Japan. A lot of it was sunk, and some of it was buried on the Philippine Islands by General Yamashita, who was appointed the occupation commander by the Imperial Japanese General Staff in, I think it was 1944. So in other words, Yamashita comes into this operation fairly late, and the only component of it that he was really familiar with, most likely, was simply that aspect of it having to deal with operations in the Philippines, rather than the entire operation. So this is problem number one with what they're stating. Now let me continue with the article. Of course, the world must have far more gold than is reported to government agencies and the World Gold Council. Government gold reserve data is always disinformation, as central bank swaps and leases are not reported, and governments sometimes don't fully report their gold in their possession. Now I want you to remember this point about swaps and leases are not reported, alright? Nobody, not peasants in India, the new middle class in China, coin collectors in the United States, and lordly old families in Europe, files a public inventory of his gold possessions. If the U.S. government had access to a vast secret stash from Yamashita's gold, it likely would have been pressed into the service of supporting the dollar through the London gold pool in the 1960s, and the gold pool would not have collapsed because of the Western gold reserve inventory draining in March of 1968. Similarly, with a vast secret stash to draw from, the U.S. government probably would not have terminated the convertibility of the dollar into gold for foreign investments in August of 1971. Now please note, these are all true, but they're true if this system was ever meant to be taken public to any degree. That's the problem with it. And if such a secret stash had been available to the United States, it seems unlikely that Britain, the closest U.S. ally and through the Bank of England, longtime executor of the gold price suppression scheme, would have felt obliged to begin selling half its gold reserves in 1999 to avoid a short squeeze in the gold market. If so much secret metal was still available to Western governments for gold price suppression, that suppression probably still would be operating through the dishoarding of metal from official reserves as it operated through the London Gold Pool rather than through the sale of futures and options contracts, paper gold, supervised by the Bank for International Settlements, and that Germany's Bundesbank has chosen to repatriate only a fifth of the gold it believes it has deposited at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and repatriate it only over 7 years does not suggest a great surplus of metal either. In other words, you get the idea of what they're arguing. Now, my point here is that they are really arguing soundly, because I've never maintained that this gold reserve was probably much larger than an order of magnitude. Maybe a little bit more than that, but I don't know how much or how extensive that would be. I have heard some people arguing that the actual amount of gold may be in existence as much as 2 orders of magnitude larger than what some of the official numbers report. But one thing is very interesting to note about this article. First of all, it's an acknowledgement that the official figures are obfuscated. In other words, there is no number out there in the world that you can look to and say, that's the most accurate estimate, that's the problem. So in other words, we don't know, and even the folks at GATA don't know how much gold or silver there may be. Now, the problem that I see with their argument, and again it's based on the speculation that I offered in Covert Wars and Breakaway Civilizations. And let me remind you of what my argument really is. I've had people write me and ask me or tell me that what I'm arguing is, as a system, won't work, that eventually it will collapse. And I'm not arguing that the system that was set up would work. I'm simply arguing that this seems to be, based on the historical evidence, what they actually did. And there's a difference between the two. I'm simply saying this appears to me that they set up this system covertly after World War II. And here's the problem. The system was set up, it was designed to be a virtually inexhaustible source of covert operations slush fund activity. In other words, a vast political slush fund. All right. And the second thing that I personally think it was used to do was to leverage an enormous amount of credit, all right, which then in turn was used to finance very covertly the vast expansion of post-war credit that occurred through the blacks projects of the United States of America principally, and some of its Western allies. That, for reasons I don't get into here, but in the book and also in the book I'm writing now, I suspect was due to their perception of the situation that they were confronted with at the end of World War II, with the emergence of the Cold War, and with another phenomenon, and I'm going to sound totally crazy here, the other phenomenon being the UFO, which they in the elite interpreted as a potentially long-term hostile presence that humanity had to achieve some sort of parity with, and do so as quickly as possible. That would have required a Manhattan Project on steroids, and that would have required in turn a vast amount of financing. So I think that you're looking at something that isn't so much going on now as this article kind of avers. But if you turn the clock back, all of this gold rehypothecation took place secretly in the years immediately following World War II. And because of that secret rehypothecation, that gold was not used, it was not available for propping up the dollar during the 1960s, all the way up until the point that President Nixon took the United States off the Bretton Woods agreements in 1971. That system had to remain hidden. And therefore, I think thus far, the financial community hasn't really addressed what, in my mind, are all the necessary factors. But again, I caution you, I'm not arguing that the system that the elites put together was a system that ultimately would work or be able to sustain itself forever. I'm merely maintaining this appears to be, on the basis of the best evidence available, what they appeared to have done. How long that system would be able to last is another matter, and I think the burden of my remarks over the past few 2 to 3 years about this subject has been largely to say that there are people in the world that know that this system exists and that it's in its final last legs, all right, and they are attempting to unwind it as quietly and with as little fuss and muss as possible. This is why I think ultimately you have the flight from the dollar, because people are waking up not only to the fact that the Western financial system is horribly corrupt, but it has also been so intertwined with the basis of American military power that this is what they're really concerned with. In order to check that power, they have to weaken that system as much as possible. So this is an interesting article, but I still don't think that it addresses all the fundamental questions that need to be addressed about the subject. So that's it for this week for my news and views from the Nefarium. I continue to wait on some research material. Those of you who've asked me about covert wars and the clash of civilizations, I'm at a kind of a standstill right now because I found some very crucial material that I have to have about a particular person in order to finish this book and do it correctly and bring it up to speed with the most latest research that has been published out there about certain people. So I'm waiting for that. As soon as I get that, then I have 800 pages to read through. So it's going to be a while, folks, but I am still working on the book, and hopefully it'll be out this fall. Thanks for stopping in. God bless everybody, and I'll see you on the flip side.